So we are 26 days away from the trade deadline. The Columbus Blue Jackets kind of in a tight spot here. They've never won a playoff series. Their leading scorer, Artemi Panarin, going to be an unrestricted free agent after the season. How do things stand right now?
Well, obviously, there's no reasonable expectation if you're in Columbus right now to assume that Artemi Panarin is going to re-sign in Columbus. And really, that's been the feeling all season long. But it became much more apparent this week when Panarin's agent, Dan Milstein, basically announced, hey, I've consulted with my client. We're not going to talk about a contract until free agent period in the summer. So some people assume that is as good as gone. So the question now is the same as it was before, and that is, what does Jarmo Kekalainen, the general manager, do? Do you keep Artemi Panarin for the playoff run and risk losing him for nothing in the offseason? Or do you make a deal at the deadline, ostensibly for future considerations? Because most of the teams that would want Panarin don't want to give up anything off their roster and weaken it by adding Panarin as a rental. So is that worth it? And that's really the conundrum that they face at this point. Now, this is an elite player. I mean, this is not just some rental that's going to help out a little bit here. We're talking about an elite guy who drives play, scores goals, makes plays. He's one of the best offensive players in the National Hockey League. So there's two critical factors for the Blue Jackets. Number one, what's the return coming back? Is it a bounty where you look at it and say, oh my goodness, that is fantastic. We need to take that in as opposed to lose them for nothing in the offseason? Or is it a situation where you look at it and say, a first-round pick and a mad prospect, you know what, we'd be better off just having and keeping him as what we call our own rental. So that's really the decision-making for the Columbus Blue Jackets on that one. And a lot of it will have to do, too. Is the team red hot at the deadline, or is the team really cold? And right now, the Metro Division is wide open. They're right in there with the Penguins and the Caps and the Islanders. No reason to presume that'll necessarily change. And if that's the case, then it all comes down to price for Jarmo Kekalainen. You got to entice him to say, you know what, it's worth giving up arguably our best player and sabotage our chance in the playoffs to take in what you're going to get.
And then there's Sergei Bobrovsky as well. You add him into this whole thing. It really complicates matters because it's certainly not as easy to move him if you wanted to.
Same dynamic, a little bit different, though, for the very simple reason that Bobrovsky has a full no move, full no trade. So right now, I wouldn't suggest that the relationship between Bobrovsky and the Blue Jackets is warm and fuzzy and that he necessarily wants to do them any favors. But if they were to come to him and say, hey, we might have an option for you here, if it suited him, then maybe he would. What happens to Panarin obviously could impact Bobrovsky. I mean, if they decide to trade Panarin, then they might say, you know what, let's go all in on this, on to reload and rebuild and move Bobrovsky out if you could at the deadline. But you may want to keep the goaltender that gives you a chance to be competitive. If he goes back to Vezina form at the right time, he could take you a long way in the playoffs. And people forget this, but the Columbus Blue Jackets, everybody says they haven't won a playoff series, and you're right, they haven't. But go back to last spring. Who had the Washington Capitals on the ropes in the first round? Caps were down 2-0. They were into overtime of Game 3. That goes the other way. And ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. But
yeah, but it hasn't been a Merry Christmas because they've been in situations where they played well in the playoffs, only to lose in the playoffs. They lost last night to the Sabres. Not a good loss for them. On Monday, the Leafs, they made what you'd have to call the first significant move here, acquiring Jake Muzzin from the Kings. So you look at defensemen around the league, who might be next?
Well, keep an eye on the Carolina Hurricanes. It's no secret whatsoever that they're moving a right-shot defenseman. On any given day, it varies. It could be Brett Pesce. It could be Dougie Hamilton. It could be Justin Falk. Take your pick of any of those guys. Now, the Toronto Maple Leafs were scouting the Carolina Hurricanes, and they were interested in a right-shot defenseman, namely Brett Pesce. But in order for Carolina to make that deal with Toronto, or for Toronto to make that deal with Carolina, Toronto likely would have had to give up either Andreas Johnsson or Kasperi Kapanen, and they weren't prepared to do that. So they went to plan B, I guess you can call it that, because ultimately they wanted a right shot. They took the left shot in Muzzin, gave up the first-round pick, but nobody off of the roster. So we'll keep an eye on the right shot D for the Carolina Hurricanes. They want to get a key forward in return. Cody Ceci from the Ottawa Senators, another guy to keep an eye on. The Senators, he's most definitely in play. He's a right shot D. He's restricted free agent at the end of the year. There's some question as to whether Ottawa would want to sign him or be able to sign him to the money that he might be commanding. So it's a little different situation. He's not a rental, and he's not a guy like Muzzin who's got a year left on his deal. But if they could get a first-round pick and a prospect, Cody Ceci will move before the deadline as well.
All right, let's go back to Carolina because they're only 4 points back in Pittsburgh for that final playoff spot in the East. Michael Ferland, another guy who's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. Is this a matter of when, not if?
I would assume so, unless things change dramatically, which I don't think they will. And I think right now Carolina is working on a bit of an accelerated timeline, even though the trade deadline is only 3 weeks from Monday. I think they'd like to get Michael Ferland moved sooner rather than later. They don't want to risk that he gets injured. They've decided that whatever he's looking for contract-wise, they're not going to be able to take care of it. So they want to try to get a first-round pick in exchange for him. Don't know if they will, but that's the asking price right now on Michael Ferland. There's lots of interest. Any of the teams, Boston Bruins, Nashville Predators, to some degree, maybe the Pittsburgh Penguins, amongst many others, interest. Because Michael Ferland, he's got a lot of tools. He plays a hard physical game. He can score some goals. He can hit and he can fight and brings a lot to the table. But it won't be in Carolina long term, we don't believe.
All right, enough with the trade talk. Let's talk about cash. Let's talk about Auston Matthews. Where do things stand on the contract extension front?
Well, neither Kyle Dubas, the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, nor Judd Moldaver, the agent for Auston Matthews, are saying anything. They're just saying it's a healthy dialogue. But all signs point to significant progress being made. Now, I think the reason for the significant progress is because I think both sides have moved off the desire to maybe lock up Matthews on an 8-year max term deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs because the number would just be too high. Connor McDavid makes $12.5 on an 8-year deal. But with the cap going up and people playing to this percentage of a cap that a lot of agents go to, if Matthews wants to hedge against the inflation of the cap over the years, he would be asking for 13.5 million. And if the Leafs want to sign Marner and Kapanen and Andreas Janssen and do all the things they want to do to make them a contending team, that's just way too much. So I think what we're looking at now, a 5 or a 6-year deal, closer to John Tavares level money. Tavares makes 11, maybe 11.5, 12 for Matthews. There's a legit chance this gets done before the trade deadline, although that's not an absolute carved-in-stone guarantee either.
Interesting. Another thing to watch with the Maple Leafs. Bob, thanks so much. We're going to have much more with Bob throughout the night. If you have a question for our insider, you go online and you can hit him up using the hashtag AskBob.